by telling Congress the truth that they would be lied to. So in '69, I thought, well, the time has come now to put out what I have. To do that, however, would clearly end your career, and I thought probably would put me in prison for the rest of my life. I thought if I did that. About truth-telling, the power of truth, and the power of nonviolent action, militant action, committed militant action. Remember that Gandhi didn't like the term passive resistance. It sounded passive, weak, not doing it. He wanted something for militant, strong, committed action that was not violent. And he came up with satyagraha, holding to the truth, or translated sometimes as truth force. For a kind of committed, strong, dramatic action at risk to oneself, which is not violent, and which can exert power. But I read all this, and it was theoretical in my mind, and then I met, again through Janaki's influence, at a conference, I met young Americans, more or less your age, a little bit older, going to prison for draft resistance. Not because they thought their going to prison would end the war, but because it would convey to others that this war was wrong, that they were acting out of conscience, and that it deserved conscientious action to oppose it at risk to oneself, even if going to prison. So that example got through to me. I heard it. And I heard this one guy at a same talk. Janaki was giving a talk one afternoon. This other guy, Randy Keeler. Have you ever heard of him?
He lives right down in Massachusetts here.
Gee, yeah, maybe you could get him to come talk to you. Anyway, but Randy Keeler is later the national coordinator of the Freeze campaign, the nuclear freeze campaign. He did go to prison for about 2 years for draft resistance. I heard him speak. I cried for a long time after hearing him. I sat down in a men's room in the auditorium and went and just cried at the thought that this was what my country had come to. That the best thing that a guy like Randy could do is go to prison. It's a sad thought. That my son was probably born for prison, I thought, because there was going to be a lot to resist. And indeed, he has spent a lot of time in jail. And for civil disobedience. So then I thought, well, what can I do now that I know I can go to prison? Because it seemed obvious to me, you heard me describe the combat I was in, if I'm willing to risk my life in Vietnam and I believe in the effort, it's obvious to me I'm ready to go to prison, if I think about it, which I hadn't occurred to me before. So these people put into my mind the question, what can I do to help end this war now that I'm ready to go to prison? And I thought of putting out the Pentagon Papers. Actually, they ended in '68, so they ended under Johnson. They didn't go to Nixon. They didn't prove what I was saying about Nixon. But they did show that what I was saying about Nixon was that he was about to do what 4 presidents before him had done. The same thing. He was lying about it in the same way, he was threatening in the same way, he was escalating in the same way, and to the same hopeless prospects. So it would give some support to what I was saying about Nixon, although it wouldn't prove it. And it seemed to me worth going to prison to do that. Now the way that came out, actually the Senate did not put out the Pentagon Papers right away. They were afraid of the political retaliation that would come. Fulbright didn't jeopardize his career, the Senator, Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, by putting them out, although at first he said he would, but then he decided it was too politically risky for him, so he didn't. 2 more invasions take place. The Senate wasn't putting the papers out. So finally I gave it to the newspapers, and I was put on trial. The Supreme Court finally said that the injunctions were unconstitutional. They could print, the papers could print these documents, but I was put on trial. However, that was the start of things as far as Nixon was concerned. He wasn't concerned about the Pentagon Papers. Those just revealed the Democrats' lies and crimes. I was talking about his coming lies and crimes, and above all, his escalations. I was not trying to indict people for what they'd done in the past. I was trying to stop Nixon from what he was about to do in the future. I wasn't trying to indict Johnson or whoever. I was trying to end the war. Nixon knew that. Nixon feared that I had documents to prove what I was saying about his policy. I could have had if people who I was talking to in his administration had given me documents. But they didn't. They should have, but they didn't. They didn't have the precedent of the Pentagon Papers to aid them, and they hadn't met Randy Keeler and the others, and they didn't take that chance. They didn't give me the documents, or I would have put them out. But he feared that I would. So he had a very practical problem, how to stop me. He couldn't just threaten me with indictment, we'll put you in court if you put out these documents. I was already in court. Apparently threatening me with life in prison had not deterred me. So he had to find some other way. All he could do was blackmail me or kill me. So he tried both of those. He sent people into my former psychoanalyst office to get information on my sex life or whatever with which he could blackmail me into silence. And as Pat Buchanan puts it, all they found about my sex life was stuff that they felt might improve me in polls. I was a bachelor at the time, and in fact Hunt and Liddy got so excited by what they found of my sex life that they began to imitate it. But they were very turned on by it. I had a wild, it was my bachelor, a wild bachelor days. And what, in the words of Bush, who's saying now, you know, they're questioning him about his marijuana smoking and various other things. William Bush, he says, when I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible. And so they weren't able to get stuff they could blackmail me with. So they brought up people to silence me physically, either to kill me or to shut me up about what I was saying about Nixon's escalation. But that's a crime. Even though they didn't, they backed away because they thought they were going to be patsies for it. So they didn't in the end beat me up, but they beat some other people up on the fringes of the crowd. And that was a crime ordered by the White House. When those same people were then weeks later, caught in Watergate on a different criminal operation, they now were in position to be squeezed by the prosecutors as to what else they knew, and what else they knew was crimes by the president. So the president had to shut them up by bribing them. So the president gave over $100,000 to Howard Hunt to get him to lie to the grand jury about what he had done against me. That's what he was bribed for. I'm going into my psychologist's office and the attempt to beat me up or kill me on the steps of the Capitol, just weeks before he was caught. These bribes were new crimes, known to new people. And they had to be paid off, in effect. So this is what John Dean called the cancer on the presidency. More and more people have to be paid off, and each one of those is a crime, a new crime. Someday this house of cards is going to come down. And it was Dean who brought it down. So I was on trial. When it came out, then these crimes against me, my charges were dropped. First time that it ever happened in a federal court was before I went to the jury for governmental misconduct. And ultimately, the president faced impeachment proceedings on this and had to resign mainly for what he had done against me. It so happens that the crimes of going into the Watergate and the dirty tricks in the campaign and the illegal campaign contributions were never traced to Nixon to this day. Probably he knew of them, almost certainly, but there's no paper trail. And the people who knew didn't talk. Mitchell would have known, Haldeman would have known, but they didn't talk. They kept their vow of silence. And they went to jail, actually, as did Liddy, rather than talk. So we don't know. But Hunt was not prepared to go. Hunt had to be paid off, as they said. And Dean was not prepared to go to jail for the president, especially for Haldeman and Ehrlichman. He said, I'll do it for the president, but I won't go to jail to protect those guys. And so he did go. And the president then, his criminal problem was what he had done against me, not what he'd done against the Democrats in Washington. So Randy Keeler's example, or John Key's getting me in to meet these people, and then Randy Keeler's example, in going to prison, and what I had done, and the threat that posed to Nixon, that I might have documents if other people had given them to me. In effect, there was a causal chain that did lead directly to Nixon's being removed from office, and that in turn made it possible to end the war. Congress, meanwhile, cut off the money, but Nixon would almost surely have ignored that. He just would have spent it anyway, unconstitutionally, as Reagan did when Congress cut off the money for the Contras, cut it off, said it was illegal to spend money to support the Contras. Reagan spent it anyway. He got money from the Saudis, from Bahrain, from Iran. He dealt with terrorists directly, etc. People are now saying, how can you deal with Milosevic? He's a terrorist. Reagan found it possible to deal with the Iranians, whom he identified as the chief terrorist state. When a terrorist has a lot of hostages, he's got something to bargain with, and he may bargain with in Reagan's interest there. But I'm saying Nixon, like Reagan, I think would have gone ahead and spent the money and kept the war going unconstitutionally and said, impeach me. But when they did impeach him on other crimes, he was gone, and Ford was not willing to do that. Ford was not willing to do that. So the congressional ban on the money held, and the war was ended. The war ended. If you want to know then, can one person made a difference? Yes, John Key made a difference, Randy Keeler made a difference. A lot of people made a difference. The demonstrations made a difference. Without them, the war would have gone on years longer. And you can't say no to the president without any risk. But your neighbors, your bosses, well, there's trouble, it makes trouble. The risk can be small, but it's not zero. To do that takes some courage. Courage is contagious. Every act of courage that people do by changing their own lives to take these risks emboldens other people, strengthens other people to do what they can. I know the power of that action because I felt it on my own life. It changed my life.